My name is Cynthia Aaron, and I'm an Associate Justice on the 4th Appellate District Division 1, and we're here for the Legacy Project interview of Justice Richard Huffman. Justice Huffman, I know that you're a California native. Can you tell us about your early life? Where were you born and where did you grow up?
Sure. I was born in Los Angeles. My father was a LA County fireman, and my mother was a homemaker. And we lived in various parts of Los Angeles as he moved from station to station. And then my parents got divorced when I was 9. And then I lived in the Huntington Park area of Los Angeles County for a number of years before my mother remarried. Actually, it was when I was in the Huntington Park City Junior Band and marched in the Rose Parade.
Where did you play in the band?
The flute.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
And did you go to high school there?
No, my mother and her husband moved to Paramount, which is towards Long Beach. So I went to the newly constructed Paramount High School and graduated from high school there.
And you started working for pay at a relatively young age, didn't you?
I did. I started delivering papers at about age 12, and I think I had a Social Security card by the age 15 and had to get a work permit, but I worked washing dishes, sweeping floors, finally got a job in the grocery stores as a bagger or box boy.
How did you get to work when you were that young, too young to drive?
Well, I worked in the first jobs I worked in the neighborhood that I could ride a bicycle to the wherever I worked, to the drugstore or to the restaurant or wherever I worked. Then by the time I got working in the grocery store, I had an old beat-up car that I could drive. Actually, I had a Model A Ford.
Really?
Yeah.
That must have been...
It wasn't new.
Okay. When you were growing up, what did you think you would do for a living when you were an adult?
Well, by the time I began to think about that, I concluded that I was going to be in the military, that I was probably going to be in the Coast Guard, and I ultimately applied for and was appointed to the Coast Guard Academy, where I stayed very briefly. But I think my early plans were to have a military career. Didn't work out, but that's where I thought I was headed.
Going back to high school, I just want to ask you, as I understand, met your wife in high school, didn't you?
I did. She had moved from Long Beach to Paramount with her mother and new husband, and yeah, I met her there. We didn't socialize or talk on anything. She liked me there. I was kind of a nerd. Probably am still a nerd, but we then had mutual friends, and I think I asked her for a date on New Year's Eve, the year we graduated, at a friend's party.
Oh, and the rest is history?
The rest is history, yeah. I'm so smooth, I suppose. I think I said, something like, "When are you going to go out with me?" That's a pretty good line. And her response was, "Well, when are you going to ask?" So I asked.
That's cute.
Yeah, we've been friends a very long time.
Now, I understand you were the first person in your family to go to college.
True. That's true. My mother's family came from Kentucky in the South, and we're still, I think, reeling from the Depression era. And my father's family came from Minnesota, South Dakota, but nobody had gone to college till I did.
What motivated you to go?
Well, it seemed to be that was the family's conclusion, that I needed to go to college. And I think the discussion was when I was a kid, well, whatever you do, if you get an education, they can't take that away from you.
So the education was valued in the
It was valued by the family. It was thought to be very important. Not important enough for the family to pay for any of it, but...
Well, that must have been difficult. You worked your way through college then? Yeah,
well, I had, of course, I was first appointed to the Coast Guard Academy,
yes, let's talk about that.
I didn't pass the physical once I got back to Connecticut, so I came back and was admitted to USC in the Navy program there. So, but I still worked part-time in the grocery business, and then a couple years into school, Carolyn and I got married, and I dropped out of the Navy. So I took a semester off and worked in the markets, which, I'll tell you, is a great motivator to go back to school when you realize this is what I could be doing the rest of my life. So I think,
I'm sure that's true.
Yeah, my grades went through the ceiling when I went back to school, but I worked full-time in the grocery business through Cal State Long Beach, and then even when I went on to law school, I had full-time.
So you were holding down a
employment.
full-time job and attending school.
Right. Yeah, it was an interesting time because at Long Beach State you had to take PE classes, which I resented rather greatly, having to unload trucks in the morning and then come and play volleyball or something.
Couldn't get credit for unloading trucks.
No, and I kept saying, so what if I hurt myself? You're going to support the family. My grades in physical ed were not really great. My attitude wasn't very great either.
Well,
but
somehow you carried on.
I got through, yeah.
Well, how did you happen to apply to law school?
Well, when I left the Navy career idea, I thought I was going to be a high school teacher and teach history.
Oh, okay.
And so I was taking graduate courses at Long Beach State when a friend of mine that had been in the Navy with me thought we ought to go to law school. And I think back about the lack of planning in my life. I mean, I didn't even know a lawyer. I'd never met a lawyer, and I'm not exactly sure what I expected, but family friends introduced me to a lawyer who helped sponsor me in my applications, and I got accepted in the evening program at USC. And then
So the evening program, so you were working full-time during the day, you said at first at least at the grocery store.
Right.
And going to school in the evening.
Right, I went to school. Evening students weren't terribly popular at the law school, I guess, but because we had to go 5 nights a week and every summer for 4 years.
Oh.
After working in the grocery stores for a while, a family friend, again, same one, got me a job at the North American Aviation as a contract administrator in the first in an Air Force missile program and then on the Apollo program. So,
And that was a full-time job as well?
Oh yeah, very much of a full-time job. But I'd leave every evening and drive downtown Los Angeles, go to school.
Must have been hard on your wife.
Oh, well, she's probably should be nominated for sainthood. You know, we had a son, and I worked through college and I worked through law school. And besides that, I'm a compulsive, so if I wasn't working, I was probably studying.
Well, served you well.
Well, she hung in there with me all through that.
And when you were in law school, what kind of legal career were you planning to pursue?
Well, again, the depth of my ignorance about the legal profession was profound, as I think back on it. But after being a contract administrator, I thought that I would do, first of all, I thought I'd go to work for North American, but they don't, again, naive enough not to know that they wouldn't hire kids out of school. So I figured that I'd get a job with a firm doing some form of transactional work in Los Angeles, someplace. That's what I thought I would do.
But you didn't end up doing that, did you?
No.
What happened?
Well, life overcomes you sometimes, but the North American is paying me, I think, $950 a month. The going rate for a new lawyer at a Wilshire Boulevard was about $600 a month. For whatever reason, the Attorney General's office wanted me. They offered me $750. So you got a wife and child and house payments, and so I took that job thinking, well, the AG doesn't do just crime, they do civil, administrative, and I could do all that. Then I'd go out and be a transactional lawyer. And that didn't work out.
No, that didn't happen either.
No.
What kind of work did you do at the Attorney General's office?
Well, these criminal appeals was the basic work for a while. I did some workers' comp, some administrative law, trying to do other things. And then I got assigned to the trials and investigation section of the small group of people that we filled in for where there were conflicts by DA's offices.
Right.
So I ended up doing trial work with the Attorney General, which led me to some trial work with the U.S. Attorney, which led me to being in the DA's office, and my whole career changed.
Do you remember your first trial?
Oh, yes.
What was it?
Well, first of all, I've never tried a misdemeanor case. That's not many prosecutors could say that.
That's fortunate.
Yeah, but we had the retrial of a pimping and pandering conspiracy that had been tried in Los Angeles, where the DA's office had a conflict. Got a hung jury. So this was a retrial, and otherwise it would be insignificant, except the defense attorney was a fellow named Irving Kanarick, who was legendary in Los Angeles as a wacko.
How so?
Well, his idea of a trial is to object to every single question you ask. Every question, including name, which is hearsay and whatever. And then his idea of cross-examination would go on. If you had a half hour of direct testimony, he could cross-examine for a week.
Oh, boy.
Until you finally got him shut off. But he'd represented Smith in the Onion Field case.
Oh.
Ironically, he's one of the few people I know that has a published opinion from the California Supreme Court that he was competent to try a death penalty case in Ray Smith on habeas corpus. But anyway.
Sounds like an adventure.
It was an adventure. It was probably the best trial training you could ever get, because the judge's view is he would sustain any valid objection. Mm-hmm. So you had to learn how to get around that and deal with this obstreperous idiot while you have, retrials where your witnesses are prostitutes who've been questioned and are sick and tired of being there. It was an experience.
I'll bet. Well, at some point you became involved in a mob prosecution.
Yeah.
How did that come about, and what was that about?
Well, the local from here, Frank Bonpensiero, and an L.A. mob figure by the name of Jimmy Fradiano. But they had gotten loans from the Exchange Bank in Chicago, where the mob had raided the bank, and they brought their trucking company down to Imperial County to work on Interstate 8 that was being built at the time. And of course, I think the headlines were the mafia invades the valley, and so on. The district attorney asked for help, which he did often down there. So the Attorney General's office sent two of us down, but one of them, apparently knowing more about El Centro than I did, didn't show up. So, but they sent me down there in August of 1966.
El Centro in August?
Yes. And I knew so much about it, I was wearing a black suit. First job was to go get clothes. So I helped with the prelim down there, and then a state judge dismissed the case for some bizarre reason that we appealed and ultimately got it reversed. But in the meantime, the U.S. attorney here, who was then Ed Miller, and the FBI moved in and charged these people in federal court.
In San Diego?
In San Diego. But what happened is the assistant U.S. attorney who had handled that case went into private practice. So the then U.S. attorney, Ed Miller, came up to L.A. and asked if I could be assigned as a special assistant U.S. attorney, because I had the one that had the factual knowledge of this event.
And I think you were saying that might have been the first time that a person was cross-sworn.
The first time they had a state attorney, the head of the criminal division came out and they had a big press conference, and it was kind of a big deal at the time. But the creative process, actually, they still use to some extent here in the Southern District, of having cross-designation of state attorneys as assistant USAs and then U.S. assistants as deputy DAs to take advantage. Each forum has different advantages for the prosecutor, and it's, picking the best place to take your case.
Exactly. So is this how you met Ed Miller?
Yeah. Yeah, he was U.S. attorney at the time, and
Right, and then he later became San Diego District Attorney.
right. He ran. When Nixon was elected, Miller was out, so he was in practice for a little while, but he ran for DA here and defeated a longtime favorite here. And so when he was elected DA, he offered me the job as Chief Deputy DA.
And what's the role, or what was your role as Chief Deputy DA?
Well, I think I've made it up, as we go on. I think I was all of 31 with 5 years experience. So
It's young.
yeah, it was challenging, but it was administrative in the sense of being responsible for supervising a number of divisions of the DA's office. And then I tried cases that I thought were important.
So you were involved in hiring, I understand, and you hired a number of women and minority people in the DA's office?
Yeah, we did. When it was an interesting time, because when Ed arrived, he was a moderate Democrat and moved into an office that had been run by arch conservative Republican, which was essentially all white males. And his view was that wasn't the way to run the shop, that we ought to have more diversity in the attorneys, not just have women as clerks, but as attorneys and investigators. And so we actively had to recruit in those days. We'd go to the schools and recruit, and it was a little bit revolutionary among the male staff, but yeah.
And what year was that? Around when was that?
We started in 1971.
So kind of a pioneer in...
Yeah, it was. It was. I mean, they followed a consent decree between the county and the litigants over Justice Department over diversity hiring, but we didn't care about their stinking decree, because it was important to find. They had to be qualified.
Sure.
But we thought it was important to open up opportunities.
Do you think it made a difference in the office?
Oh yeah. Well, of course. I've all my years teaching in law school and watching. I had 2 women in my law school class.
Right.
And now it's at least 50% or more. So it's just sort of the beginning of a trend for women and minority lawyers. We're getting more involved.
And I remember hearing as a lawyer in the community that your role in the DA's office was kind of to be the heavy.
Yeah.
You were aware of that, I assume.
I was in the late 70s when Star Wars came out. The deputies decided that I was Darth Vader.
Now, why was that?
Well, Ed was a wonderful, gentle human being, and Bill Kennedy, who was the assistant DA, was a really nice man. Neither one of them wanted to do things like fire people.
Oh,
or if things were not going right, it was usually my job. And for good or for bad, when I have had jobs like that, I don't go in and say, Miller said, I'll deal with it myself. It wasn't mean to people, but it was not good to be summoned to my office, I was told. Well, I think myself a very friendly person, but...
I can just picture that. I'm glad I wasn't in a position to be summoned to your office. And you were saying you also were able to try cases while you were chief deputy. Are there any that stick out in your mind as particularly memorable?
Well, there were a number of interesting ones. I mean, we had the first case I tried down here, a fellow literally executed a police officer following an unarmed robbery. And we, of course, tried it on the theory of getting a death penalty. Guilt wasn't an issue. Fairly elaborate trial, and it becomes significant because the jury returned a death verdict the same day the Cal Supremes issued their Anderson opinion overturning the California death penalty.
So how did that play out?
Well, we still had the judge. The judge still sentenced him to death because there was still the likelihood of appeals. Ultimately, he was the death penalty was set aside. Although, ironically, this guy was such a jerk, he got himself killed in prison But anyway, but there were others. The last trial, of course, I finished with an 11-1 verdict, where I tried the mayor
Oh,
of the
yes.
city for perjury and conspiracy and things of that type.
That's right.
And then I left the next week to go teach a class on jury selection. When I was 11-12 civ expert, but we had a number of significant cases here.
And you were clearly a very accomplished trial lawyer. You have membership in the American College of Trial Lawyers and the American Board of Trial Advocates. What did you like about trying cases?
Well, I liked the challenge of, I guess, sorting out what you're going to do, organizing a case, picking jurors, dealing with witnesses. It's quite a drama when you really get into it, trying to not only marshal evidence, put it on, but make it live, to the point where people understand what you're doing. Of course, in criminal trials, I didn't have to do depositions, and I didn't have to do discovery and all that stuff. So you function at a different level. And being the chief deputy, then the assistant DA, I wasn't trying the day-to-day drunk drivings or misdemeanor cases. They were major cases, and had investigators, and so it was kind of like cops and robbers, if you would. It was exciting. I enjoyed it, although I think by the time we finished the first trial on the mayor, I think I worked 7 days a week, maybe 18 hours a day for months.
Yeah. It's all consuming.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
It finally just drained. It was a good diet. I lost over 20 pounds in the process. But I went, and then about the same time as when I got appointed to the Superior Court. So I was ready for a new adventure.
So if there was anything you didn't like about trying cases, it might be that all-consuming nature and stress that goes along with it.
Yeah, I think it's my own personality. Being compulsive as I am, I would burn myself out in these cases, But I would say today, if I had the opportunity to go try a case, I'd do it, just because I think it would be exciting.
It'd be challenging.
It'd be challenging.
By the way, were you able to select the cases you wanted to try as chief deputy?
Yeah.
Well, that's nice too.
Yeah, that's right. No, I had the best of all worlds. I mean.
Now, when you were in the DA's office, you were also involved in local bar association activity, weren't you? Right.
I was on the county bar board.
Was that something that was encouraged by the DA's office, or something you wanted to do?
It's something that the DA and I encouraged people to do. There weren't many DAs participating in the county bar.
Still aren't, really.
Not so many, no. But we paid their bar dues and a number of things to try to get people. And there's been, at least Melinda Laster was at one point president of the county bar, so we've had some participate, but we thought it important. And I participated in some state bar committees as well. So I tried to be involved.
And you had opportunities to leave the DA's office to enter private practice, but you chose not to do that. Why is that?
Well, by the time I got what would be a reasonable offer, I was also thinking about being a judge, and one of the local retired judges encouraged me to, become a judge. That's a better shot for it. So ultimately, that worked out, and that's when I began to get some more serious offers for private practice.
Oh.
And I was going to take one of them, actually, right after I was appointed. Liked the firm, I liked the people. And then they went over and they showed me their billing process and stuff. And I went home and I said to Carolyn, I can't do this. It's not me. I can't see me working out the finances with clients and billing. Bless her heart, she said, well, if you make more money, we'll just spend it. So why don't you do what you want to do?
Well, that's really nice.
Yeah, so I stayed with the court.
Well, let's talk about that. Now, how long were you at the DA's office before you were appointed to the Superior Court?
Just over 14 years.
And it had kind of become a goal for you then to...
In the later years.
And what year were you appointed to the Superior Court?
1985.
How did that come about?
Well, it's a long trail. I'd like to say it's all skill, but it's life on judicial appointments. A lot of, as we all know, luck. As
Well,
it turned out,
cultivated
at
luck.
one point, I was on the State Bar's Commission on Judicial Nominees Evaluation at the last year of then Governor Jerry Brown's first tour, and then the first year of Governor Duke Majan's tour. So I was there when Marvin Baxter came to deal with the committee, which was an interesting experience for him to. It was kind of like a cold shower to find out how the committee viewed their role versus the governor's role. So we got acquainted sort of there, and then after I left,
At that time, he was in what position?
he was the appointment secretary
Okay.
for the governor. The committee wanted him to commit, as Brown's people had, that if they found a person not qualified, the governor wouldn't appoint him. And Marvin's position was, no, the governor's not going to yield his appointment authority. I mean, he'll consider what you say, but, you know. Ultimately, a year or so later, he managed to persuade the State Bar president to create a group to reform the Jenny Commission, to try to make it a little more fair so that people knew what the criticisms were and were not blindsided, fun things like that.
Oh, they used to be private.
Oh, yeah, and they used to wait till you arrive and then hit you with it. So I served on that commission with him, with Marv Baxter. So when I applied, it was...
He knew you.
He knew me, yeah, actually.
Nothing like that.
Yeah, it was great. Great interview. When I met him in L.A., Carolyn went with me, invited us out to dinner.
Oh, that's very
So,
nice.
it was obviously being in the right place, the right time. And
Once you got on the Superior Court, what was the adjustment like from being at the DA's office?
it's an interesting transition. I have a view of people that like to exercise power, whether it's in the PTA or wherever. In the DA's office, it had some reasonable power. I mean, you can charge people, you can refuse to charge people, dismiss cases. You get to the Superior Court judge and assigned to the criminal calendars, and you really lost a lot of power. You can't do something if it's not brought to you.
Yes, you
And
can't initiate anything.
No, and if
Yeah.
you're honest, there's limitations as to what you can do. You have to let people try their cases, even if you think they're dumb. And then, so it's an adjustment there. It's also step away from a place where you're very busy, people coming in and out of your office every day, phone calls. When I used to travel to teach with the DA's college, every place I'd go, I'd call in to see what the current crisis was.
Right.
I went to travel when I became a judge to go to some program. I got off the airplane, went to the phone, and realized there was no one to call. Nobody cared. I felt a little deflated at the time. But I liked stepping back from advocacy at that point.
Was it hard to stay out of the trials in front of you, having been such an excellent trial attorney?
Most of the time, no, because I very strongly believe that the judges should stay out of the trial, and particularly where someone like me, you don't want to put your finger on the scale. There was one trial, the highway patrol officer was accused of murdering a young woman,
Yes.
and in the first
Notorious
yeah,
case.
it was, and I had both trials. In the first trial, the DA was a drunk, would show up drunk, would make the dumbest pronouncements.
Gosh.
So I actually did this. I went in, took a recess, went into the chambers, went into the bathroom, looked in the mirror, and said out loud, "Stay out of it. It's not your case."
It must have been difficult.
It was. But here was a very difficult case, very sensitive case. I'm not that long out of the DA's office. There was no way for me to be trying to help one side or the other.
Well, that must have been a memorable trial. I was going to ask you if there were any particularly memorable trials you presided over.
Well, that one was memorable because it was all circumstantial. You'd had the botched up first trial, and then the second trial, and it was
very high profile case.
Very high profile. There was somebody there. The media were there.
I have a feeling you controlled the courtroom better than some other high-profile cases that we've seen in later years.
I would like to think so. My view is that's the judge is supposed to be in control of the courtroom, and but even as a trial lawyer, when I trying the mayor, the media were there with cameras, and one cameraman told me that when I was cross-examining the mayor, I needed to move over because I was blocking his picture. We had a kind of a colorful exchange.
When you went on the bench, did you miss trying cases?
No.
Oh, that's good.
No,
you were ready.
I was ready, and I wanted to do more than just criminal. I mean, I did some little family law and criminal calendars and the supervising criminal judge. But I left the business because I wanted to do other things, civil, whatever. And the presiding judge had a weird sense of humor. I told him after doing this that I'd like to do some civil work. So he put me into what was known as civil law in motion.
Oh.
For a person who never practiced civil law, it was it's a way to learn.
Well, I have another question about your experience on the Superior Court. Do you know how you were perceived by your former colleagues at the DA's office, and was that difficult at all?
It wasn't difficult for me, but they perceived me as they probably have done to others as somewhat of a traitor. When somebody asked to amend an information on a few hours before trial to double the potential punishment, I said no. You would have thought I had 3 heads, but
that hadn't happened to them before, huh?
If it had, shouldn't have happened for me because I was supposed to be one of them. But
so, how long were you on the Superior Court?
A little over 3 years.
And then you decided you wanted to apply to the Court of Appeal.
Well, I did appellate work in the AG's office. I've been started teaching in the law school in 1972. I find I like the law issues in the judge business more than the fact-finding issues. And there's also an opportunity. Justice Butler was retiring, and the legislature had provided 2 more positions here. So, and Governor Duke-Majan was still in office, and I'd been.
The stars were aligning.
Everything was, it was just one of those things, and so I applied and got appointed.
And that was what year?
1988.
Was it what you hoped or expected it would be in terms of the legal issues and getting to grapple more with that sort of thing and less of the fact stuff?
Yes and no. I think I had, like my diving into being a lawyer, not knowing what I was doing, I had probably some misconceptions. I'm going to have time to consider these issues, and there's a lot of work here. You don't really have time to just ponder. And I think the hard part, now you get to the position where you write an opinion and somebody disagrees with you. I mean, a Superior Court judge, I don't care if you disagree with me. Now all of a sudden I have to care.
Right.
And it changes your approach and thinking in a way I hadn't really thought that through. necessarily. I mean, fine, I've adjusted to it, but it's different. But also I found that I had to do other things than just write opinions. So I got involved with the judicial administration business and all that stuff.
Very much so, and we'll get to that in just a minute. I want to ask you a little bit more about your experience on the Court of Appeal. What do you enjoy most about being an appellate judge?
Oh, I think I enjoy working through problems, the puzzles that we often call cases,
Yes.
Issues that I've never seen before.
It's amazing you can do this work for many, many years and still there are issues that you think would have come up, but they haven't.
Right, exactly. And sometimes when you get your cases and sit down with the staff and say to a staff attorney, okay, you go first, what do you think this is? Because everything is so different sometimes. I think that's the most enjoyable of the process.
Now, you have said that people would describe you as being conservative, having a law and order background, but I've been working with you now for over 14 years, almost 15, and I wouldn't describe you as predictable, conservative in your opinions. Would you say that you have a particular judicial philosophy or approach to cases?
Well, I try not to be honest with you. I mean, we are who we are. You're the product of our background, our philosophies in life. But the appellate work, to me, we're here to deal with something in a more structured area. We've got rules, standards of review, presumptions, and statutes. And to me, my judicial philosophy is, I guess, I want to get it right within the range of what I have to work with. Now, will I, in that area where there's, we all know there's gray
Yes.
in the process, it may be that I lean more conservatively on some things than others might, but I think you still have to step back and say the trials are done in the trial court, discretion's exercised there, the legislature makes policy. We're here to make sure the rules have been followed and somebody got a fair shot, not to have do-overs. So,
well, I mean, from my perspective, viewing your opinions, I don't think that you are at all predictable, and I think that's a good thing in an appellate judge.
I hope so.
You're trying to get it right, and I think
Yeah.
that's reflected in your opinions. How do you and your staff approach opinion writing, though? What's the process?
Well, for our chambers cases, when the cases are assigned, I look through the briefs before I assign them to, one, to balance the workload, also maybe to give one staff attorney a break from having too many sex crimes in a row or something. And then I assign them, and then the process is when the attorney is ready to work on the case, he or she lets me know, I read the briefs, they've done their brief reading and some preliminary research, then I usually send them a memo of my tentative thoughts, and then we, in some instances, some cases are pretty straightforward and there's not really much challenge or debate, but on some of them, then their job is to come back and talk to me as they work through it. Some things we just finished an insurance case, and we must have met a half dozen times. They bring me statements of decision, portions of a transcript, or also give me a list of the significant cases that I need to read, so that by the time the draft is prepared, it should be pretty much what I want. I wouldn't have an attorney draft something and then bring it to me and me to start fresh. I don't do that.
I think I would agree. I think your approach makes a lot of sense for whatever that's worth. Are there any opinions over the course of your career here that stand out in your mind?
Well, this 29 years is umpteen thousand opinions.
I know. It's hard to remember.
One of
sure.
the downsides, some lawyers say, I read your opinion on such and such, and you might say, really? What did I say? Because it's been so many. But
I understand.
A couple. I mean, we had criminal habeas corpus, again, the killing of a police officer, and it appeared that the DA's office had some pretty outrageous behavior where they were allowing the informant to have sex in the DA's library, and
that was another very high-profile matter.
It was, and it really appeared at the end of the day the informant was probably the actual killer. But ultimately we had a appeal. It was, I know we had 28 boxes of materials that made up the record and the habeas petition, and ultimately we granted habeas corpus and vacated the murder convictions. That was a big deal because my old friend was still the DA. But you know, life's like that. Yeah.
Now, besides teaching, which we'll talk about, and deciding your cases and other things, you have volunteered to sit on the Superior Court a number of times while you've been on the Court of Appeal. What inspired you to do that?
Well, I did it about 15 times, I think, over the last 29 years. A couple things. One, I didn't do much by way of civil trials. I only had one civil trial, jury trial as a lawyer, and only a few civil trials as a judge and a civil law in motion. So one thing I wanted to do is some civil trials to work with the jury instructions and the case management process and all that I hadn't seen. But also, it's just my quirky philosophy, but I think I need to remind myself that I can make mistakes faster than any Superior Court judge, no matter how thoughtful I think I am. Meaning, I want to keep in mind that we're dealing with people working their way through problems. And things like the exercise of discretion, for example. It was just important to me to go force myself to do the same things they do.
So it wasn't just theoretical?
No, I didn't want to be theoretical.
Yeah.
I wanted to keep my hand. And then I did about 3 trips to juvenile court for sometimes as much as 6 weeks, because Carolyn was a CASA at the time, and juvenile dependency law was very important to me, and I wanted to see up close what goes on.
And what did you derive from that experience?
Well, I pity the juvenile court judges, but
Tough assignment.
it's a tough assignment, and it's understaffed, particularly the attorney staffing for children and families has been very poor. They're finally getting a bit more money from the legislature, but it's been a neglected area, and the court system, the judiciary, pays for the attorneys. And it's been a real challenge. But I think we've collectively, I mean, I'm just way out on the periphery, but we've made some helpful changes, I think, in getting a better level of representation. And children are not just a piece of furniture to fight over. They're people who have rights, and we're at least been able to get them meaningful representation, and I'm happy about that.
You were involved in that Blue Ribbon Commission.
Yeah, I was on the Blue Ribbon Commission on foster care for a number of years.
Now, we alluded a little while ago to your service on the Judicial Council. Did you, my impression is that you may have served longer on the council than anybody else, possibly.
Marvin Baxter beat me.
Did he?
He stayed, yeah. I was there. I started in 1996 and left in 2011. And Marv stayed on a couple more years till he retired.
So you were appointed then by Chief Justice George?
Right.
And you and he knew each other well before then.
Oh, yeah. When I started with the Attorney General in 1966, Ron was in the Appellate Division there. You could always tell there was a difference. He had a big office with windows, And I had a great office, but I had to get out in the evening so the janitor could come in and get his equipment. But he was, it was he was handling cases in the U.S. Supreme Court. We used to joke when we do some of these programs. He'd go off and handle cases in the U.S. Supreme Court, and I would go over to El Centro or Holtville and handle something. And his rejoinder would be, "Yeah, but you won your cases," because he had Chimel and some of the really big cases. So we knew each other, and then he left to become a municipal court judge under Reagan, and I went off to San Diego.
So on the Judicial Council, under Chief Justice George, what was your role?
Well, after the first year, I was appointed chair of the Executive and Planning Committee, which was one of the, I think then 3 internal committees that was responsible for setting the agenda, doing the planning process, and acting on behalf of the council when it was not in session.
That's a big job.
Yeah.
Time-consuming, I would imagine.
Yeah. I figure the Judicial Council and the various assignments, it took about 2 full weeks out of every month.
Wow.
So when I left the Judicial Council, I write many more opinions now because I have to find something to do with myself.
Did you remain in that role the entire time you were on the council?
Yeah.
Is there anything else about being on the council that?
Well, it was an interesting time because we went through state funding of the trial courts, which was new, the unification process, which was a big deal, and then the case management system developed a schism between some of the trial judges and the council, and there's the view that trial courts ought to be the individual counties, and then there's the view it's a state system, and of course with state funding there's been more pressure. So there developed some acrimony between particularly the Chief Justice, but some parts of the Judicial Council, including me, and the Alliance of California Judges, for example. And I think one of the things that the current chief has tried to do is to tamp that down a little bit, where Chief Justice George's comments, and bless his heart, somebody said, well, the Alliance is going to object to that, and he said, not doing something because the Alliance objects would be like canceling your trip to Yosemite because there's ants on the road. He actually said that. Now,
so that went over well?
Not so much. But then, so it was a time that when he left, there was a natural transition. I think try to minimize some of the acrimony that arises in that kind of a process.
Was your role at all while you were on the Judicial Council, being, as in the DA's office, kind of the deliverer of bad news or the heavy in any sense?
Well, not as much, but the chief view that I needed, it was kind of like being the party whip, to move things along, if the chief was particularly concerned about an issue, maybe I could go, and my task was to go work the crowd, talk to the other members to see, to try to see if we could get some resolution. And I'm probably pretty aggressive about it. And I've good news and bad news. Sometimes I'm pretty straightforward in what I think.
Sometimes?
And sometimes that offends people. And I always hate to offend someone accidentally, but anyway, so that's what led to me to be, the chief declared me the Judicial Council's curmudgeon at a statewide meeting, and that kind of stuck. I think I have 3 copies of the portable curmudgeon that were given to me.
Yes, you have an award, don't you?
I have an award, yeah.
Well, it's a badge of honor,
Yeah,
isn't it?
they meant it in good spirit.
In addition to serving on the Judicial Council, we talked about your service on the Jenny Commission. I did want to ask you what you served a couple terms, I think.
Right.
What qualities do you think are important in a trial judge?
And a trial judge?
Yeah, I'm just interested in your service on the Jenny Commission and what you were looking for.
Well, Jenny Commission was one thing, but I served about 4 years on Governor Duke Majan's advisory committee on judicial appointments.
Oh, did not know that.
Where you do a little more looking at qualities. I think the Jenny Commission, to some extent, is looking at qualities, but they're looking at it perhaps to see if there are negative.
I see. More ruling people out?
More of it. It struck me more of it of that. But the things that would come up, of course, skill, intellect, and expertise strike me as the minimums you're working with. Now, you're going to be a trial judge. You may not have tried securities cases, or you may not have tried criminal cases, or you may not have, but we would be looking classically for sound experience in the law, whatever it was, intellect. Then one of the things we used to say to people, one of the qualities is patience. Perhaps that's why the appointment process is so agonizing, because it's something that we think we're patient, but trial judges get tested in their patience hourly, and it's very important, I think. And the reputation for integrity, honesty, and the ability to make a decision is very important. So our jobs, either at the Jenny Commission or for the governor, were to survey the community as best we could, get information about the person's behavior, background, experience. Of course, from the governor's office, probably philosophy is certainly there. Nobody wants to appoint somebody that's going to be an embarrassment or something of that type.
Right.
So those are the general things. Trial judges need to be thoughtful, experienced, hardworking, patient, and have some knowledge of the human condition.
Right, and as you said, know how to make a call.
Yes. I have to say to some people sometimes, read the job description. This job makes decisions. If you don't like making decisions, don't do it. It's not going to be any fun.
Good advice. Another enormous thing that you've been involved in is teaching. You taught for over 40 years at various places. What did you teach? Where did you teach?
Well, I said I wanted to be a high school teacher and didn't take graduate courses, but I've had a lot of opportunities. I was on the faculty of the National DA's College for a number of years, taught all over the country.
Teaching trial practice? Or
trial practice, conspiracy law, confidentiality, privacy, discovery, disclosure. I got an opportunity with the National Institute of Justice to teach DAs and sheriffs and police chiefs privacy law, discovery, and disclosure. Taught it when I was in the DA's office. I taught at San Diego State in the criminal justice program. I've taught a couple of times at Cal Western. I've taught judicial courses both as a lawyer and as judge.
Right.
But my long tenure, I started teaching at USD Law School in September of 1972, and taught every semester, some summers, and 4 foreign programs until I retired this last December.
Why were you so dedicated to teaching?
Well,
you had to have been dedicated to it for that many years.
Yeah, it's first of all the intellectual challenge of not only trying to understand but trying to communicate. It was always helpful to me as a lawyer, judge, or whatever, if I can get law students interested and understand. It's enjoyable process to deal with bright people that have questions. I just liked the process of learning and teaching and discussing, and there were always, I don't know what the students learned over those years, but I learned something every
Well, I can
time.
tell you that I run into lawyers around town all the time, and every single person who went to USD and had you as a professor tells me you were the best professor they ever had.
Well,
So
I love it when they talk like that.
I hear it all the time,
that's nice.
and I don't think they're just saying it.
Well, it's been very gratifying. It's been, and I have to say, I'm glad I stopped, because after that many years, working 2 nights a week and all that stuff, but I miss it.
I was just going to ask you whether you miss
Oh,
it.
yeah.
I thought
Yeah.
you might.
I do, but not enough to keep doing it.
Well, 40 plus years is
44, actually.
that's wonderful. I mean, it's really public service.
Yeah, they don't pay you very much. I say that.
No, it really
Yeah.
is. You know, you're doing a service to future generations. So I see it. Okay, awards. Looking at your biographical material, I noted that you have received many, many, many awards over your career, both as an attorney and as a judge, that are, as they say, too numerous to mention. Some are even named after you, both at a local and state level. Are there some that are most meaningful to you, or would you prefer not to say?
Oh, they all, of course, they all mean a lot. The one of Outstanding Professor Award from the law school was something special. That's the only, as far as I know, the only adjunct professor to ever get that
quite an
acknowledgement. Quite an honor. And for a while, the moot court, they at times changed, and for years they had the Richard Huffman Award for participating
Right.
with them. And here recently, the Abota chapter has created a Judicial Civility Award they call the Richard Huffman
That's quite an honor
Judicial
as well.
Civility. That's a pretty good transition from being a curmudgeon to judicial civility, but
Civilized curmudgeon.
civilized curmudgeon. But that meant a lot. And I have the Ronald George Judicial Excellence Award, and for a while there was the Richard Huffman Award for families and children, but the council has since removed all the names off of their awards,
have they?
probably to placate the alliance, I'm sure. But they used to have the Ronald George Award and the Vickery Award, and but they still give awards. They just took the names off of them. But it's still those things were very meaningful.
Now, my impression of you when I first came over here and was hearing about you was I heard a couple things that led me to think of you as a Renaissance man. I understand, as we talked about briefly, you're a musician. How did that happen?
Not a very good one anymore, but well, it's one of those things when starting as a kid. I started with the violin, and I hated it, but I had orthodontic work, so I couldn't play the clarinet or the trumpet, so I got a flute. And partly because when I was young, my parents were divorced, but I got sent to this special program. I don't know what was really special ed that they hid, but the principal was, I still remember, Gertrude Wallenstein Petty. Her brother was Alfred Wallenstein, the director of the LA Philharmonic.
Oh.
So classes got to go to the symphony, the opera. We had music. So, and then when I moved to Huntington Park, I got in this band that played around the state, marching band, for kids. And
So you stuck with it.
I stuck with it even a little bit in college, and then I put it down, and to my everlasting shame, when I have a new flute, but doesn't sound quite like it used to sound. It must be the flute itself.
Must be.
But then, I was in the choir and in the school and in the church.
You're a singer?
Well, I was in the
Now
choir.
that I didn't know.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I knew you were a musician. I didn't know you were a singer.
Yeah.
And I understand that you're quite an accomplished ballroom dancer.
Well, my wife and I love to dance. Yeah, we belong to a group called the Cotillion Club that has ballroom dancing several times a year. So, yeah, I don't know how accomplished I am, but she's great.
Oh, that sounds like fun.
It is fun.
I wanted to go back to your experience at the DA's office. I believe it was at the DA's office.
It's actually the AG's office is what we were.
Oh, okay. And that you had mentioned that you tried a no-body murder case.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Well, again, this special trials, we covered a lot of ground. I think I was appointed a DA, honorary deputy DA in both Riverside and Imperial. But anyway, this information we got led to claim that in these competing drug rings, that this one person who we were looking at, his group, had murdered several people, including this other drug dealer that he was dealing with, and buried his body somewhere in Riverside. It's quite an elaborate murder conspiracy that goes from Phoenix to San Francisco to Alameda to Los Angeles to Riverside, and involved murder for hire. The only thing missing, yeah. It took 5 months to try the case.
Where was the trial?
In Riverside County.
Okay.
Yeah, and the only thing missing was the body. But it was one of those once in a lifetime trials where colorful investigators, and they're uncovering things during the trial, like finding where the body was going to be buried with the sulfuric acid and the plastic lining and all those things, but the body wasn't there, and it belonged to an itinerant, guy who had been a Navy pilot and then had a PT boat that he was using to smuggle. I mean, the kind of Damon Runyon characters that it got written up in a couple of detective magazines, and
those are supposed to be very difficult cases to prosecute.
They are, particularly with, the case law is pretty clear. You can do it, but you have to be able to convince somebody in the absence of the body that the person's not just gone, they're dead.
Yeah.
And when your body belongs to a itinerant drug dealer who often runs off in boats or whatever, it gets a little challenging. But it was one of those, probably the most marvelous investigation I've seen police officers do, whether they were police officers, AGs, investigators. They were themselves characters of considerable color. And it was, interestingly, we got the guy convicted. The jury didn't impose the death penalty, rather wisely, because some years later, the victim's name was Warren Hudson, and these investigators would send me cards, signed Warren, things like that. And then they said, and so they finally found him.
They did?
Yeah. But he was dead.
Well, yes.
He was found in a cave. They put him in Paris, California, in Riverside County. It was
sounds like a colorful.
It's probably the most colorful trial, where again things are just unraveling, and it all fell together, and quite an experience.
Sounds like it.
Yeah.
Well, now, let me ask you this. Have you found being on the Court of Appeal to be a fulfilling experience?
Yes, I have. I have. I think a lot of it's been coupled by doing more than just appeals. I'm not sure if I'd have done just appeals during all this time, that would have been sufficient. I'm now comfortable, having worn myself out, doing all the things. I'm still on several advisory committees, but I'm more comfortable with working on my appellate work and keeping a more regular schedule. But Yeah, it has been. I've learned a great deal. Hope I've contributed somewhere.
And it's important work.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important also that we do the work the way it's supposed to be, by the rules, and not interject our bias and prejudice. It's hard. We're humans.
Right.
But to the extent that we can do it, I think this court in particular needs to be objective, apply the rules fairly and even-handedly, and leave discretion, policy, generally speaking, somewhere else.
One more question.
Okay.
Looking back on your career, your legal career, is there anything that you would have done differently, or anything you wish you would have done but haven't?
I don't know. It's one of those things part of me would have liked to have had some experience in private practice. When I was doing organized crime work with the Justice Department and had connections with Ed Meese when he was Attorney General, and that part of me would have liked to work in Washington in the Justice Department for a while. I'm glad I had an offer to be Assistant Chief of the Organized Crime Section in Kansas City, which I happily declined and stayed here in San Diego. So there's opportunities like that. Part of me wishes I would have explored them a bit, but I have had such a full experience that I can't say that there's I can't say that I've missed much.
No, it doesn't sound like you have. Well, thank you.
Well,
very
thank you.
much.
Thank you for doing
Very
this.
enjoyable.
Yeah.
I knew it would be.
Yes. Well, what can we say?